basically now I'm going to put a probe to test for our sub cables and our power. Negative will go on the negative side of the battery, positive will go on the positive side of the battery. With a probe you can give something on the vehicle power and you can take away power. You can give negative as well.
So what you'll see him doing now is actually looking for the sub-cable wires, and how you'll know it's a sub-cable wire is it will be thicker than the rest. Whilst doing this, looking for a negative and a positive wire, you will see that all negatives on the BMWs are brown. So if it has a color with a brown stripe in it, that would be negative. So next you'll be looking for the two corresponding wires so that you can pulse the sub or the speaker depending on which one you are at. And now we'll be supplying it with power, and that will pulse the speaker. So next, as he started looking for the other speakers and the other sub, I actually told him that I would rather prefer the entire loom pulled back into the cockpit, so that when I do conversions in the trunk area, that none of the wiring would be in my way. So next you'll see us doing that. So here we've gained access to the wiring harness. If you would like to know how to gain access to this, you can go back and look at the rear view mirror install. It's exactly the same procedure, and on there I explain how to take out the pieces of trim. So we'll be cutting off all the cable ties, keeping the harness in its place so that we can then draw it back into the cockpit. This is one of the power cables for the subs, and here you can see just everything laying as a mess, all taken apart and everything disconnected. So if you're considering doing the same thing, there's a few things that you would need to disconnect. One is that white piece of cable that is holding in his hand. That is the power antenna cable, which basically makes the block for the receiver switch on. And then your reverse sensors are also connected onto this loom, but I think that was quite easy to disconnect. There's a clip that disconnects everything. So next we're attempting to take out the sub, and once you remove it, you'll actually notice that there's this foam ring around it, like an O-ring almost, and that is used so that your sub seals into the box. Now it does make it a little bit softer, takes a bit of the sound away, the loud sound, but it gives you a better quality sound. So next you'll see that red cable will be to power the amplifiers, and on there's a fuse. It's not a very big fuse, and then we'll be taping this power cable to the existing loom, to then once we pull it into the cockpit, the wire will follow the existing loom. So we'll need to remove all this trim. If you would like to see how to do that, I've got an entire video on how to remove the center console trim. And once you remove the backing, you'll have complete access to all these wires. So what is touching there is actually the audio wires, and we'll be pulling now this entire piece of loom back into the cockpit and also pulling through our new power cable. So you might be wondering why there is so many wires on this piece of loom, and the reason for that is there's actually 10 speakers in this car, or 8 speakers and 2 subwoofers. And what happens is that all this wiring is coming from your radio to the amplifier, which is situated in this box next to your battery, and then that is called your signal wires. Then your audio wires exits from there to each of the speakers within the vehicle. That is why there's so many wires running in that piece of loom. Now also note that once you are going to be probing these wires, half of the wires will not have a completed circuit, as they are signal wires. Those wires can be removed altogether if you wanted to do so, because you will be laying in new signal wires as seen here from the radio to the amplifiers, and then you'll use the existing wires that runs to the individual speakers to power them with sound. Here you'll see the RCA cable that's being pulled through. That is for the amplifier, as this radio has a RCA amp out.
Basically this is a loom for the vibe amplifier for the high inputs. So I'm basically gonna put my own plug over here so that it works as a plug and play system. So if anybody wants to resell it or anything, again, there's no wires or anything that are cut out.
So this piece of loom just makes it easier for you to tie in your entire amplifier system. But if you would want to do this the old-fashioned way, those purple wires and the green is left and right rear, and the white and the gray is front, left and right. If you would want to know more on how to install these as a raw product or a raw wire, not with any connectors attached to it, go and watch my first video on how to install the aftermarket radio or media center, and you'll see how exactly these wires work with your loom. So watching that video before this one will give you a greater understanding of how to wire in all these raw wires with ease. So next what you'll see him doing is just connecting up front, left and right speakers, and I actually have 6 speakers in the front, as I've got 2 in the footwells, 2 in the doors and the tweeters above that. But I'll be running the tweeters with the ones in the door panels, as my RMS rating supports exactly that. So you see me pointing now as my mid, and there at the top you see my tweeter, and at the bottom there is a 5.5 inch footwell that is in there, and those two are run as one signal. So that will be my front left and my rear left, and these 3 once again are run as my rear right and my front right. So I hope that makes sense to you, and that is for my equalizer so that I can switch the speakers and control them. So next let's have a look at what he's doing here. He's just connecting up all these wires to that connector clip, and you'll see him there busy connecting up the purple and the green, which is left and right in the rear, and then he'll move on to connecting up the white and the gray, which is front, left and right. And these wires are all going to the front section of the car, as I explained to you previously. So if you want to fully understand the wiring a little bit better, go and watch the video on the media center install. It'll all make much more sense. So when we'll be connecting up all these wires, we'll be using solder heat shrink to connect all these wires properly together to make sure that we've got good contact. So now that we've got the connector soldered in, we can just lay all of this under the carpeting to make it look as OEM as possible, and we'll tuck all of these wires away. So the next wire we'll be tucking in there is the RCA cables, and that is for the sub to have signal and sound. Okay, so now that all our wiring is neatly laid in, next what we can look at is to now trim the loom that we've pulled through, and as we trim this, we'll start looking for the speakers to pulse these speakers to know exactly which ones are speaker wires and which ones are signal wires. So let's quickly have a look at the connector that he has in his hand there, and that would be now your speaker out. So that will be the signal coming from the radio going through the amplifier, and then it will exit through that piece of wiring harness into the speaker harness. As you see there, once again, we've got purple, green, white and gray. So those are left and right rear, which is purple and green, and then left and right front, which is white and gray. But as I explained to you earlier, as this is a 4-channel amplifier and I have 6 speakers in the front, that entire amplifier will be running only my front speakers. So my left side will be front, left and rear, and my right side will be right, left and rear. So next have a listen to the footwell speaker pulse.
Positive.
So this will be now the rear right, which is the purple wires, and that will be connected to those 2 that you see standing out right there. So that is the passenger side front footwell. So as I explained to you, some of the wires are signal wires, which comes from the radio. As you can see, this wire has no continuity. So he cannot pulse it as it is a signal wire. It is not a speaker out. Those wires are obsolete. You will not need those wires in any way because you laid new signal wires from your aftermarket radio to the amplifier. So just be aware, the amount of speakers you've got, you'll have the same amount of signal wires. So don't fear if you're going to be probing these wires and you're not getting any feedback or any continuity on any of these wires. You will find your opposites, which are the speaker out, and they will pulse.
Just now when we're testing that,
Yeah.
there's nothing seen out automatically. It's getting continuity. That's
Tweeter.
a tweeter.
So if you have a look at this Vibe amplifier, you'll see the orange cable is a live wire coming directly from the battery terminal, the power. The blue wire is your signal wire. That signals the amplifier to switch on once you activate your head unit. And then the brown cable is just your earth. The two white and gray, or light gray and darker gray, is your positive and your negative for your amp out. So I'll be using both my subs to run together into this one monoblock amp. Now once again, you'll need to check your RMS rating to see if you are straining the amp, because if you strain the amp, you'll burn out your amplifier, or if your amplifier is overpowering your subs. If you do that, you'll tear a diaphragm or you'll blow your speakers. So all we're doing here is just taking the two wires and converting it to a single with the heat shrink and the soldering. And here you can see the final product, and the single wire will go into the amp. So as you all know, the modifications does come with their own drawbacks, and yeah, I had to drill quite a biggish hole in the bodywork of the car, or in the sub box, and that is because I decided to put my two amplifiers in each of these boxes. So behind the driver's seat we've got the 4-channel amp that will be running all of the speakers, and behind the passenger is the monoblock. So next we'll use this plug to give power to the other amplifier, the remote and the earth. So we'll use this to give power to the opposite amplifier once again to make this a plug and play system. So next what you'll see him doing here is just connecting up the wiring, and this is the signal wires. This is the ones giving signal to the amplifiers, and then that translates to sound coming out of your speakers. Now you need to connect left to left and right to right to keep your balance and fader, and then you'll see that white is left and gray is right. And then don't forget, for your rear, purple is right and green is left.
Wires.
Just wait, let's go.
This is your speaker input wires. This is giving your amplifier sound. Left will be white, gray will be right. Green, rear left, purple rear right. Basically, and your remote wire to switch the amp on and off. Every time you put the radio on, the amplifier will come on. You put the radio off, amplifier will go off, because that wire is like a switching wire.
Okay. So next you'll see us playing around with the RCA cable, and you'll see it's a twin going into a single. And the reason for that is the harness that goes onto the aftermarket media center only has 1 amp out. So we'll be splitting that signal to go into 2, which one would give the signal and the other one would give the power to the aftermarket amplifier. The RCA gives you full control over the range of sound that comes out of your subwoofers through your amplifier. So you can control all of this on the aftermarket media center. So next is my favorite part. It's just connecting everything up and putting everything back together, tying everything down and making sure everything's in the right place. Then finally we can have some sound. Now that everything's installed, we can finally tie down the power cable and make sure that everything has power and test the system. Next, let's throw back all the trim and the job is done. I hope this will help you with your install. It's a step-by-step process. You need to follow all the steps to make sure you do this install right, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for tuning in.